Genesis 37 begins to dive into the life of Joseph. And really, for those of you that don't know the story of Joseph, Joseph was a dreamer. God had given him dreams. He would eventually be sold by his brothers into slavery, which we'll learn about in this chapter, in the land of Egypt. But God would use him in a mighty way as he walked with God. And one day, God would use him not only to save Egypt, but to save his family. And really, it's an incredible story of how even when bad things happen, if you continue to trust God and you continue to do things God's way, God can promote you even when it doesn't seem like it's possible. Genesis 37, verse 1. Jacob lived in the land where his father had stayed, the land of Canaan. This is the account of Jacob's family line. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the son of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and he brought their father a bad report about them. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons. So Israel, or Jacob, his favorite son was Joseph, because he had been born to him in his old age, and he made an ornate robe for him, or you may have heard before, the coat of many colors. So Joseph's dad made for him a coat that none of his other brothers had, and he was his dad's favorite. And so, as I'm sure you know, he's 17 years old, it says, I'm sure that there was tension between him and his brothers, especially when he's coming from the field and he's snitching on his brothers for what they were doing while out in the field. So I'm sure there's a little tension between Joseph and his brothers. Verse 4, it says, when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. Okay, so we know there's a lot of tension. Verse 5, Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said to them, listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaths gathered around mine and bowed to it. Oh, awesome. His brother said to him then, did you intend to reign over us? Will you rule over us? And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. Then he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. Why he is telling his dreams to his brothers, I'm not really sure. My guess would be, he's 17 years old. He's growing in his maturity. He's excited about something that God's showing him. He's probably not thinking about the emotional ripple effects or the relational ripple effects of what he's saying, and he's probably not sharing these dreams in the most humble way. He's probably sharing them in a prideful way, but it doesn't say that for sure. But I mean, have you ever met a 17-year-old who didn't boast when something good happened in their life? I know when I was 17, that's how I was. Verse 10 says, Verse 9 says, then he had another dream. He told it to his brothers. Listen, he said, I had another dream, and this time the sun and the moon and the 11 stars were bowing down to me. When he told his father as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and says, what is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you? His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. His dad said, what do you think? And he's like, don't share these dreams. You don't, this dream, he didn't, I don't even know if he believed the dream or not, because he said, what are you trying to say, that we're going to bow down to you? But then it says that he keeps the matter in mind. And so it's interesting. It's as if he heard it, and when he heard it, he didn't like it. Yet at the same time, in his spirit, there was something about it that was unique, and he kept it tucked away deep in his thoughts and deep in his heart. It's really interesting. These prophetic dreams were given to him by God, and one day we would see them come to pass, not necessarily literally, but they were metaphorically come to pass. They are pictures of how Joseph's brothers would serve him. Verse 12. Now his brothers had gone to graze their father's flocks near Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, as you know, your brothers are grazing the flocks near Shechem. Come, I'm going to send you to them. Very well, he replied. So he said to them, go and see if all is well with your brothers and with the flocks, and bring word back to me. Then he sent him off from the valley of Hebron. When Joseph arrived at Shechem, a man found him wandering in the fields and asked him, what are you looking for? He replied, I'm looking for my brothers. Can you tell me where they are grazing their flocks? He said, they've moved on from here, the man said. I heard them say, let's go to Dothan. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them near Dothan. But they saw him in the distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. Here comes the dreamer, they said in verse 19. Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams. When Reuben heard this, he tried to rescue him from their hands. Let's not take his life, he said. Don't shed any blood. Throw him into the cistern here in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him. Reuben said this to rescue him from them and take him back to his father. Verse 23. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the ornate robe he was wearing, and they took him and threw him into the cistern. The cistern was empty. There was no water in it. Verse 25. As they sat down to eat their meal, they looked up and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Ishmaelites, we remember them. These are the descendants of Ishmael. Isaac's brother, the one that Abraham had with Hagar when they tried to do things in their own strength and not wait on God's timing. So this would have been their grandfather's brother's children and descendants. And so the Ishmaelites come, and there's traders, they're slave traders. Their camels were loaded with spices, balm, myrrh, and they were on their way to take them down to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, "What will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood." Oh, how kind of them. Yeah, we're not going to kill Joseph. We're just going to sell him into slavery. And they acted like this was okay, like this was acceptable, like this was a good idea. It's really kind of crazy. It says, when the Midianite merchants came by, his brothers pulled Joseph up out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites who took him to Egypt. When Reuben returned to the cistern and saw that Joseph was not there, he tore his clothes. He went back to his brothers and said, "The boy isn't there. Where can I turn now?" Then they got Joseph's robe, slaughtered a goat, dipped the robe in the blood. They took the robe back to their father and said, "We found this. Joseph must have been eaten by a wild animal. Some ferocious animal must have taken him out." Jacob, verse 34, tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, and mourned for his son for many days. This was, their custom. It would have been like wearing all black to a funeral. He was weeping. He was mourning the death of his son. For all his sons and daughters came to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. "No," he said, "I will continue to mourn until I join my son in the grave." So his father wept for him. Meanwhile, the Midianites sold Joseph to Egypt, to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard. Really, it's a sad story of what took place. Joseph has dreams from God about what God wants to do in the future in his life, and he shares it with his family, which should be a safe place, and they reject him or resent him because of it. Really, from there, his brothers despise him even more, and they sell him into slavery. And it's really a tragic picture, a tragic piece. There's also some prophetic elements to it that really speak to and allude to Christ, how he was sold for pieces of silver. Christ also was betrayed for pieces of silver by one of his disciples, Judas. And in some ways, it's interesting that the brothers betrayed him for pieces of silver. And Joseph would be someone who in many ways is a picture of Christ redeeming us. He would redeem them through the tough times and through the famine, and he would forgive them, and he would restore his brothers later on. It's a beautiful picture of how God works everything out. And so I look forward to hearing more stories about the life of Joseph in Genesis. Be blessed today.